to work. So if you do want to try it, you better give yourself more than half an hour. That's all. I don't understand why it's not working, but it doesn't matter. So I was going to basically I'm going to put up I want to put up data on cities and firms and have that just cycle through on the left and right while I'm doing the talk. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to...
want those other two out?
Yeah, I might as well turn them off.
So what does that mean? You didn't get your own prize?
Oh yeah, I was not going to receive it myself anyway, but I was going to try to incentivize you guys to do it. That was the main thing to...
Power up.
So what I'm going to do instead is let's just go through the data and then we'll basically jump back into the presentation.
There you go. One down.
Let's see, can I go? Oops. I guess the main thing that's up is there is no keynote on this machine, so somebody at some point we should put keynote on that machine. Okay. All right, so let's go through the left data are going to be, on this side we're supposed to have data on cities, okay? So as background, now many of you know what I'm going to show, many of you have seen these data before, but not everybody has, so the idea is just to give everybody some kind of common vocabulary here. And I set it the darn thing to cycle, so it's going to every 10 seconds it's going to go through, so now it's not going to be suitable to discuss it really, but so I can just march it, yeah, I can move it around. Okay. So today we're going to look at distribution of firms and cities by size, measured various ways. So this will be a classic result. U.S. cities in 1970. You plot the log of. I'm just going to turn off the looping here. Okay. So this is a paper from 1980, using 1970 data, obviously. Log of population, log of the rank. Now I want you to remember how they did this. We'll come back to it in a second. Log of, oh, it is looping. Log of population versus log of rank. Every dot is a city, and these are for U.S. cities. So it's log of population. These would be the biggest cities up here. Obviously, data are more sparse and smaller cities down there. And you see that it's roughly, it's not exactly, it's roughly a straight line. Okay. We go to the year 2000. This is now, many of you know Tim Goldman. This is from his dissertation where he built a model trying to reproduce this. The previous result was just econometrics, just some statistics. Why is it doing this as I turn looping off? I don't understand.
Uncheck automatically play upon looping.
Okay, let's see if that does it.
There's also a self-playing.
Yeah. Okay, try that. Okay. So, so Tim, this is Tim's thing. Now, Tim is the only difference between Tim's and the previous one, let's see, I'm going to emphasize this. By the way, this talk is meant to be partially pedagogical for those people who have not come across these log things before. Many of these things are common to complexity science. Some of you have not had CSS 625. And CSS 625, these things are taught or at least supposed to be discussed. So this one is rank versus population. This one is population versus rank. I'll show you guys later the original plots of this type were done in this way. So Tim is doing it the way that it's supposed to be done, which emphasizes now, since this is the rank, this is the biggest city, so it emphasizes that the big things are up here, these are kind of like the smaller things. So change your focus a little bit, the slope. Now, obviously there's some departures here. Tim spent much of his dissertation talking about why there would be departures. This space says New York City is too small, it falls off the straight line. Chicago's too small, those other ones about right. Other countries have a little different thing. I mean, I have some data here, let's see. Before we get into the international situation, this says in 2010, it's roughly the same, it hasn't changed very much. Brian Barry, some of you may know, he visited here several years back. And this just, this is Joe is doing change in firm size from year to year. This is change in city size from year to year. Same kind of transition, or at least plotting one year versus the other. So you get a sense that it hasn't, basically everything along the 45 degree line means cities don't change that much in their rank. Now here's an interesting version of this. This is a measure of how robust the basic idea is. Imagine we say that, well, their cities really have some regional, interaction. And so here we have there's 4 different partitions regionally. Notice you get the same result on a regional scale. Now if you get super fine grained, you won't get the result, but it's kind of grossly speaking, you get this. And then even more interesting, you can actually just randomize the whole thing, and you still get the darn thing, okay? You still get this is basically skew distribution. Power law, roughly, by the way, I didn't mention it yet, but it's roughly slope 1. It deviates a little bit, 1.1, 1.12, a little bit different. But notice that you think, well, maybe it has something to do with the hierarchical nature of cities. But this says no, it's not that at all. It's something else, right? Because here you just broke up into pieces, and it doesn't matter how you. This is not a specific partition that gives good results. This is just a random partition.
So,
Yeah. Yes.
Can I ask, so how are the partitions done?
In
what does the color mean?
In this case, of course, it's just some kind of regional thing. I think it's roughly the same size. All the number of people in the red, green, purple, and blue are around the same size here.
Okay.
And here you just basically, literally, done it randomly to create four different, approximately the same size partitions.
Okay.
But really just uniform random over the overall.
Well, they're the same partitions. You just randomly put them in different groups on the second side. You see that the sizes are the same. Partitions are the same as the row and
Well, the partition, what that means, which ones are in the blue, which ones are in the red.
Right,
The partition is different from
take that big blue one right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, Houston.
Right, now go to Houston on the other side.
Yep.
It's the same partition.
Same shape.
Well, it's the same
And partition represents the class.
Yeah, the partition
not
is the whole
individual.
group. So this is let me, I'll step back and I'm going to show you data in a minute. What each one of these little tessellations
Yeah.
is one of the either it's called an MSA, but it could be either be a metropolitan statistical area or a micropolitan statistical area. Okay, so those are fixed, right? So the tessellations are fixed, and the partition is just going to be how you group them. The main point of this slide is simply to say it doesn't matter too much how you screw around with this. You're going to get basically the same result. Okay. Once again, painting with a coarse brush, some small details matter. Now here, what was done was these guys get back. We know him. Some of you he visited here some long time ago. This says if you define the city by whether it's how big these cities are, you make them bigger and smaller. It's not going to change the result very much once you get past some small size. Okay, so once you get up to a big enough representation of now this is the area of the city. It's not going to change very much. Okay, so everybody got that? So it's robust to how you break the intercity stuff up. It's also it's robust to how you define the cities. And we'll see that again in a French. So now now we're going to go to France. And see, this is if you use their definition of these are kind of old 19th century definitions of what cities are, you get a somewhat different result. But if you use it based on kind of what Paris is in fact this giant sprawling thing, it's more than Paris is not just this small center of. Then you get the right problem. This slope is too steep. That's the slope is about right. And then Tim did this too. So in Tim's dissertation, he plotted basically whether the commune was the one I just showed you that was too steep, and then other ways to do it. So, but once again, you're going to get this very skewed distribution. The slope is very close to 1. It has, of course, these wiggles in it. And by the way, remember how New York was too small? Well, Paris is too big, relatively speaking. So there's a famous paper by Glazier, which talks about that those countries which combine the political, economic, and cultural functions of the country all in one city tend to have one monster city: Mexico City, Tokyo. So Tokyo, Mexico City, and Paris are the 3 great examples of where the city is above the Zipf line, as it were. Okay. Once again, these are just the data. This says this was got from this guy's dissertation, where he did this interesting thing where he went back and he plotted what were the city sizes in Europe over time. What you get basically is kind of they get attracted up to the Zipf line, to the -1 slope line. Now, I can say more about this. I'm not going to take much time to do it, but just a quick background is these are all back in this era. There's a bunch of feudal cities, right? And the size of your little city-state depends on how many people you can get inside the castle walls when you get attacked. And so you can't have any giant monster cities. So it's rare to have something very large. Rome or something can be larger, or Naples or something. But most cities are small. Most what we call cities, maybe more like towns today. 1,000 people or something. But over time, as as the city-state goes, as you see the withering away of feudalism, this progressive Zipf's law obtains. Okay, and so those are those it? No. I think this thing is resetting if I don't touch it or something. Okay, Soviet cities. Once again, this is now back to the raison and resonant guys who invert the axes. So these are the biggest cities down here. Notice you get this weird thing through here. Now Tim analyzed this also in his dissertation, it turns out. So here's Tim. So this is USSR, Rosen and Resnick, USSR 1970. Hasn't changed, didn't change that much by 1997. So in Gold's dissertation, now he's plotting population against rank, or size rank, or this is a rank size plot, so-called. You get, Moscow is right about right, St. Petersburg. Now you have this weird thing here, and so Tim had the great Professor Schelling on his committee, and so there was lots of, remember, talk at his thesis defense about why this was the case. And some of you may know a bit about this. Tim actually gave a talk about this one time, I think, where these are these, some of this departure from the pure law. The argument was that these are these Soviet defense cities. They were not naturally created organic things. They were just built out in the middle of some obscure place to be far away from, invading countries or whatever. So it's some departure from the convention. Okay, this is much more recent data and for China. Has the bend up at the top, but becoming the main thing to look at is the tail now. So now you're doing. By the way, now they have it inverted the other way. Now it's it's rank up here, population here. This is and then I'm going to talk a minute about why it's rank minus 0.5. Basically, it doesn't change much over this time period, and you again see the heavy the tail at the biggest end here. Okay, so these are the big cities down here: Shanghai, Beijing. Okay, so I guess the main thrust about this of these say that it's the fact that you have this skew distribution, which looks linear in log coordinates, which has a slope of approximately -1, is true for essentially all modern countries over both developing and developed, and over relatively long periods of time. You can go back to 1820, and the U.S. looks pretty zippy. Germany, 1800. So it's a fairly robust thing. I'm going to say more about Germany in a little bit. It's a weird thing. Okay, everybody clear with that as the background? Any questions? You've seen some version of this, I'm sure. So now I'm going to do is go over to the next slide deck, which was supposed to be on the left, which is going to be the firm data. Wait, that was maybe the left. This is now we're going to go to the right. Okay, so very similar kinds of data here. I'm going to take this off from this one is also probably loop and no self-playing. Okay, so U.S. firms 1970. Simon and Jerry, this book, Simon won the Nobel Prize the next year. This was data he says it's data from December 31st, 1969. So I put 1970. I mean, they're not getting data on a daily basis back in that era, so I don't know what the difference would be. And by the way, back then, there's no IT system in place. And these data are mostly proprietary, like how big is the company, what its receipts are. So there's only 1,000 data points here. This is the Fortune one. Actually, there's only 990 points here. This is the Fortune 1000 published that year in Forbes magazine, or no, Fortune magazine. So that was the source of the data. And what these different fits have to do with the actual data of the solid line. The straight lines are various Pareto fits. But the main thing to say is now this is in terms of not number of people or employees, or this is actually what are the assets of different firms. In the same book, they also do people or employees, et cetera. I'm going to show you data on that in a second. But this was kind of the state of the art in the 70s. Okay, this is what economists do about these things. I got the data in 2000 because the IRS first put on the business master file on one machine in Detroit in 2000 for tax year 1997, and now we see going all 6 million firms that have employees, actually about 5 million this year. We see that now in log coordinates, we see this relatively straight line A and B. Notice there's 6 decades of size here. There's 12 decades of size here. This is the density function suitably bin. I'm going to talk about how to plot that in a little bit. And so we get a slope of -2. Now this is basically, you'll see in a second, this is basically the Zipf law all over again with slope -1. If you do it by receipts, you get the same kind of thing. All right? The paper in Science has all the details. Here, this is a more recent thing. We took Omar Guerrero, not many of you know him, and I took data for 10 years and we plotted the data for 10 years through the financial crisis. Notice it doesn't vary except for the 1 year, 2008, where you have Lehman Brothers, all the Bear Stearns stuff going on. But otherwise, basically, this is an invariant of the U.S. economy. So it has small wiggles in it, but it's roughly straight. Subsectors also have this structure. This is now the size of banks. You see log coordinates. Now here, by the way, here they're interestingly fitting in log normal. Notice the log normal never gets the tally right. Log normal predicts way too few big firms. Now it turns out not all sectors do this, but many sectors do. Now, just an international setting, you have the basic same results, but notice you have now interesting departures. So it's not to say that any of these big laws are inviolate, or you can produce departures. I'm not an expert on these data, but these guys, one or two of them are at the World Bank, IMF, and the way I've heard this explained is that there is a French law in place that firms bigger than firms size 10 or larger have a certain set of labor laws that apply to them, which is not the same for firms that are size 9 and smaller. Thus, you have too many size 9 firms, not enough size 10 firms. And then there's an EU law that kicks in here. Look at that thing actually turns up there. Right? So you can't fire. If your firm is 50 or bigger, you have to go through a lot of paperwork to fire somebody, basically. So there's a whole bunch of size 48, 49, firms, and not enough size 50, 51, 52. If your firm's going to get big enough, well, you go through the pain of dealing with the labor law, but there's some friction associated with doing that. Okay, Chinese firms, different years, bunch of data. Same general idea. But these are two lines. The blue lines are lines of slope -1 here, so cumulative. So robust finding here. Okay, so those things are supposed to loop in the background. You could use as eye candy, but we're not going to be able to see them as eye candy. So if you want the slide deck, just holler at me. I'll send it to you. So now the question is, what is the relation between this very skewed distribution of firm sizes and the skewed distribution of city sizes? Now, there's been very little work on understanding that relation. To some extent, Keith is trying to get at that in his dissertation a little bit, and has made substantial progress.
Define substantial.
One way to frame this thing, I credit Keith with this formulation, is that is it the case that that a bunch of people are living in the city, and then these skew firms arise from that? Or is it the case that a bunch of firms are in the city, they start growing and producing skewness, and then thus the city becomes skew? Those are quite different explanations. Those are A and B here. I mean, of course cities are agglomerations of people. Of course they are clusters of firms. Backwards. Of course they are. But which one drives the other one is the question. And so I'm not going to have a definitive answer, but I want to show you basically a whole bunch of new data about this, and suggest a possible insight into how the whole thing works. Okay. Now, I'm going to apologize. A little bit of the next 10 minutes or so probably will be a little bit of pedagogy. Some of you will already know some of this stuff. But okay, so I just showed you all the data on cities. I showed you the data on firms. We're going to go through this stuff here, but don't worry. Just march through and see. Okay. How are these two Zipf laws related? Are they related, or is it could just be complete coincidence, right? Could be there's some stochastic process going on in the background that produces these things. For example, what causes heavy-tailed cities? Do people migrate to cities because the cities have nice things there, because they have the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or because they have why do people move to the city in the first place? Why do firms form in cities? Is it due to the fact that the cities have good resources? And then, so the opposite way to say it is, could you have heavy-tailed cities without heavy-tailed firms? I showed you earlier those plots from Europe, the evolution of Europe. There was a time when you did not have heavy-tailed cities. You had basically had exponential cities. You had a bunch of feudal castles, so they were exponentially distributed, some cutoff, basically. Could you have had big firms there? Well, there were no firms there that big, unless you count something like the Catholic Church or something as a giant organizational thing. So many firms, really, it's not until the 19th century that you see really large firms. Well, just step back and say, there are always going to be kind of large monopolies, like the Dutch East India Company. That the various kind of trading operations can be quite large in scale. But many firms, up until at least until the Victorian era, in the West, and they're being kind of family operations. So it's a large family and maybe several families involved. But in the late 19th century and early 20th century, you see the rise of very large firms. Oh, but just as a footnote on this, think about some of you who are economists and know more about the economic history here. So the famous economist Schumpeter, who was alive at the turn of into the 20th century, and he wrote over the course of 50 years, he wrote histories of economics. Schumpeter I, so-called, is the guy who says in 1920s, he says, well, almost all innovation, almost all exciting things going on in the economy is because we have entrepreneurs who are in small firms doing exciting things. And then Schumpeter II, by the 40s and 50s, Schumpeter II says, little firms don't matter much. It's only the big firms and the big R&D labs that we call the innovations. So that's an example of how you can see, even in the history of economic thought, there a transition from looking at small firms to looking at big firms. So big firms, of course, become very important in the 20th century. Okay, so we'll try to explore this a little bit. We'll see how much traction we get on it. We'll see what you think. And I wish Andrew was here for this, and he's not. But I try to make this as make a kind of a clean cut on this as possible. When you pick up the geography book, you see a discussion of place, and places where people are. Right. That's the main thrust of what geographers do. Cities are very special places. It's where people cluster. Right. And then city residents are there. They have jobs. This is the substrate in which the city operates. Right. There's just there's there's always going to be the geographers think about there's a grocery store on the corner and there's a dry cleaner and there's a Dunkin' Donuts, but whatever. It's just there's this substrate of this stuff going on. Now it is well known, and people understand that for 2 generations people have understood through data that bigger cities have pay more. Take an accountant in Des Moines and an accountant in New York City. An accountant in New York City doing the same kind of work earns more, and that's been quantified various ways. That could be one reason why people move to cities. And then, in some sense, so you have the places, the people, the city, and you kind of abstract away the firms. You talk about, okay, does the city have a high unemployment? Yes or no? How many jobs does the city provide? That kind of stuff. Okay, so I try to contrast this with now. Think about how does an economist think about exactly the same topic, exactly the same meaning the economic activity in a city. So an economist says, well, what you really care about is predicting. The overall structure of economics says, people produce stuff of value. That's what we study. Yes, they consume it too, but it's production and consumption. And so the contrast is, in the same way that cities are important to geographers, cities are special places. Well, firms are the special places that production happens. Okay, so that's the normal. I want to make this contrast as clear as possible to say that there's almost no intermediate space. The point of this slide is there's not much space in between these. Cities basically have this. Cities have jobs in the same way that there are a lot of papers in the last 15 years in this kind of the Silicon Valley era. Why is it that firms agglomerate? Why aren't firms kind of more uniformly spread around? Why are all the high-tech firms in Boston or Bay Area or a few on the Dulles corridor? Why aren't they more spread around? I mean, there's cheaper labor costs in Detroit, for example, right? Firms agglomerate in cities. So cities are topics, but cities are central here. Cities are kind of our secondary here. But a famous paper of the late 80s: bigger firms pay more. Take a welder in a small tool and die shop on 8 Mile Road in Detroit. That same welder makes 20% more at GM. And it's doing the same job. Actually, every time you go up in one decade of 10% more. So if GM has 500,000 employees, it doesn't anymore. Versus a firm with only 500, you'd expect to have that's 3 decades of size, 500,000 versus 500. You expect to have a 30% pay increase. This is very robust finding in economics. And so economists typically will abstract away space. They'll put some dummy in the regression and say, north, south, east, west, and that's the extent of the space. Maybe today it's something that's more like an abstract representation. So the contrast here is that they tend to neglect the firms and the economic underpinning for good reasons. The economists hope that they can explain things without any space. That's the hope, because space is hard. It's hard to include space. All right. So this is going to be I want to basically go through it. This is the setup for the talk. What we're going to basically do is we're going to build a model which tries to span this space. Okay, the model's going to go across the middle here. The model's going to have basically some economics and some geography, and you'll see how it goes. But before we do that, just by way of background, I want to talk about things that are heavy-tailed. Now, all the data that I showed in firms and cities are very heavy-tailed. So everybody has a somewhat different understanding of these things, and so I thought it'd be useful from a pedagogy point of view just to go through this. I've plotted here the exponential distribution, where the average size here, think about the x's size, average size is 100. And so I've written it in log, not log coordinates, and it's a straight line. Why? Because taking the log of the frequency strips off the exponential, and you just get this straight line, x minus x bar, or x minus x over x bar. Okay, I'm sure everybody's seen this before. Now, one thing you may not have seen before, I want to think about what happens as I go out. I keep going out in increments, one at a time. So, if I were to say, how much weight is there in the tail at point x versus if I go out 1 unit, if I increment by 1 unit. So there's less mass in the tail, right? The tail is having less and less frequency. So as I go out more and more, if I go out 1 unit, you just do the math here, and you end up with, basically the x's are going to cancel, and I end up with just this constant. So one way to think about this is that every time I move out 1 unit, I clip off a certain fraction of the mass. Right? I just knock it off. So this keeps shrinking at a constant rate. Constant in this term. So when I plot it in logs, it's basically just going off at a constant 1 over x bar. So this tail is declining. Now you may say it's declining fast or slow. I don't know. I mean, notice if it was a Gaussian, it'd be declining faster since it's minus x bar. X minus x bar squared, so it's declining even faster. It's quadratically faster. But this is you might think, well, this is a pretty fat tail, right? It's declining. But no, the answer is that no, this is not a fat tail at all compared to this. So now here, this is the same kind of plot, but now I'm in log here, right? And this is the Pareto distribution. That, once again, back in the density function. The particular parameters don't really matter. And now think about the same calculation. Well, so this is how much mass there is at this point. Move out 1 more position, that's how much mass you have there. Now, if you do this, you say, how fast is this falling? Notice that this is not a constant anymore. I don't keep clipping the tail at the same rate. What I'm doing is, look at this thing, as x is bigger and bigger and bigger, this is approaching unity. Right? Watch this. Look at x in 100. That's gonna be 101 over 100. So it's almost. This is. The next point is almost as big as the last point. If I let x be very, very large, this is almost exactly 1, right? So the tail is dying very slowly. It's dying so slowly that some of you know this in various coursework, right? The tail dies so slowly, you could even get in a case where the area under the curve is infinite. And that's a problem if you're going to compute moments and stuff, right? So, but now not all is lost because, and maybe this is the key to what we're going to talk about in the plotting of the darn thing next. Think not about going out 1 unit. I'm going to go out 10 units, factor of 10. I'm going to go from 10 out to 100, right? So I'm going to clip the tail by that much, right? So if you do that, now you get a number, the x's cancel there. Now I got a constant, right? So every time I go out, not 1 unit, every time I go out a decade now, I lose a constant amount of probability mass in the tail. Okay, so that's the way to think about the difference between an exponential and a power law. But I have to, in order to get rid of all that mass in the tail, I got to go out an entire decade, versus we're not just 1 unit. Everybody clear on that? And that's why we call this thing a heavy-tailed system. And I try to draw now the complex picture. The reason we're showing these 2 plots is this is now we're in log, not log coordinates. So the straight line is the exponential here. This curved line now is this power law right here. So notice how the power law differs from the exponential. It has more mass on basically the smallest fluctuations, or the smallest sizes. And then for the very largest size, it has much more mass. And in fact, all the mass is between those 2 curves, right? It's got to be either up there or up there. So, because the area under the curve is 1, right? So, this is going to be much heavier tail, right? Much heavier tail than the exponential. Right? Is everybody okay on that? And then once again, just also by way of background, the terminology that's oftentimes used is that power laws are scale-free. And then the shorthand for this is that these are scaling distributions. And just to say, what does that mean? Well, so the probability of my random variable, let's say my size variable, goes like this. This is right. This is the probability that my random variable small size is smaller than that goes like that. Then then 1 minus that, the countercumulative so-called is just that, easier to work with. Now notice that if I say I want to rescale this, so that maybe the x's are people. I want to rescale it into dollars or or something. I want to just rescale the thing. If I rescale the variables, now what's the probability that this thing is bigger than that? Well, now if I propagate the constant through here, the constant ends up just dropping out. And notice I have the same relationship again. So the scale on which I measure the variable doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether I use bodies or dollars or whatever. I'm going to get the same answer, as long as they're related in some linear way. So these are systems that have. So it's oftentimes when you hear the word scaling, some people misinterpret that as saying there is in fact a scale to the distribution. But the answer is no. There's scale free, and that's the original meaning for that. Okay. Now. The plots of rank against size are known as Zipf plots. What are Zipf plots really? So imagine we have a bunch of data, and think about these as being sizes, firm sizes, city sizes, whatever. And we're going to rank them. So basically, they're sitting here. Now every one of these things is a datum, and so now we have n data points. And what we do is we say, well, each one of these things is a size and a rank, right? Let's rank them from the largest to the smallest. So this is the largest. It's a number. It's a million or 2 million or something, and it's rank 1. Next one is rank 2, etc. So basically, every data point is 2 numbers, right? A size and a rank. It's kind of it's a tutorial on how to do these things, I guess. And you would get something like this if you were to plot it. Here's the size. Here's the rank. And if it's a power law, what we get is that we basically, if you take the log of these two things, you get a line. Now, in general, you would not expect that to happen for arbitrary data. But for data that are heavy tail like this, we would get log rank, log size would be a straight line. Now, why this is the case is the subject of what I'm going to do next. Let me just sit back and say it's not intuitively obvious that power laws would be this way. Why would the rank of the data? We're talking so far about probability mass functions, probability density functions, that kind of thing. And it turns out, just as a footnote, for those of you who are going to dig into this stuff, in a paper from several years ago, Gebex and another economist reproduce a result that's known in econometrics, where if you actually, instead of using the actual rank, if you use rank minus 1/2, you get more power in your econometrics. Okay, so that's something which is done today. You'll see a plot of that coming up. We already saw one of the plots for the Chinese data. So this is the mechanics of how you do one of these plots. By the way, this is, I've argued that it's rank size, right? Rank size, log rank, log size. Several of the plots we saw earlier had this inverted, right? They were size versus rank. Maybe we'll go back to those at the end if they were going along, I'll be able to point them out. And so there's some warnings about this. As I said, one thing that's commonly done is, in the same way that these data that they are normally plotted as rank on the ordinate, size on the rank on the abscissa, size on the ordinate, what you will see is the inversion. Now, one reason why the people who invert these things don't even recognize they're doing it, because you get the same shape plot, right? It's a straight line with a slope minus 1. If I take the mirror image of the thing, or rotate it around here, I'm going to get a similar slot, a similar shape. So reversing the axes gives a plot that looks the same, but now the exponent's not the same. The exponent, in fact, is reverted. Now, if your exponent's 1, it's not going to matter, right? But by the way, this is the most common mistake that I see when I get papers to review. The most common thing, I always complain about it too. Whenever I get a paper where they've inverted the x, I say, sorry, I'm not going to accept this paper that you plot it the right way. Now, what is the right way? So usually the opposite. I said, I can plot it any way I want to. You can't tell me how to plot it. And then I'll go back and I'll cite all the stuff that I'm going to show you in a second, just as ammunition. What if the slope is 1.1 in reality? Now you do this thing, you're not going to have 0.9 or something, right? So this is an excellent way to screw up your results. And also, by the way, beware, because now when somebody plots it the wrong way and they make a big table of what the exponents are, they're all wrong. They're all inverted or something, right? So, now the second warning actually, I think is as bigger problem. This is Mandelbrot's warning. Mandelbrot says, it's his book called Scaling, the title of the book is called Scaling in Economics and Finance. He says the trouble is half the papers you see which have power laws in them, particularly have log rank plots, only have like 20 data points, 30, 40, 50. They're only going over a decade and change. And there, it's hard to tell a true power law from an exponential if you only have a decade of size. Now, I made an example of that. The example didn't turn out to be that pretty, so I didn't put it in the slide deck. But basically, once you get out to basically 2 decades of data points, then in fact it's hard to then you can basically see the exponential starts tailing off, and you don't see that with only 1 decade of data points. So if you think you have a power law, but you only have 1 decade of size, beware. Now, remember, but here's the solution. If you encounter this, remember the scale doesn't matter for the power law. So if you can get more data points, you may say, well, there's no such thing in my system. I'm dealing with banks. There's no bank bigger than size 20. I can't get more. Well, if you can actually slice and dice these data, so you can make these data richer, and then just recompute it instead of being on in terms of millions of dollars, you do it in thousands of dollars, and that's one way to maybe fix it, to actually see if there's more data there. So anyways, in the book.
So Rob, just a quick question. So Mandelbrot is making a distinction between the amount of data and the range of where the data falls, or there's no distinction?
He's complaining about the following. He's saying there are many papers published which have roughly a decade or a decade and a half of data, and they assert there's a power law, and he says with only that limited amount of data, an exponential, which is not heavy-tailed, and a power law, which is heavy-tailed, look very similar. Hard to separate them.
Regardless of how many data points are within that decade.
Well, he's saying basically, a decade, because these are ranks, really.
Yeah. Oh,
so
I see. Okay,
I have like 15, 20 data points. So, but I say one solution is to, since it only works in some cases, if you can actually get data that's in between here, you just get more of it by rescaling the things. That's one possible route. But, by the way, Mandelbrot had very sharp, he had very sharp, where he's famously, strict about how he viewed the science, and he didn't also suffer fools very well. So he would take, where I would tell a journal, I would tell a paper writer that I was reviewing, I would say replot the data, etc. He would have just rejected it probably. Right? So. But that just is my only Mandelbrot side I'll say today is we had a conference in Santa Fe one time, and this is like 2000 or 2001, somewhere in there, and I was sitting next to him at the conference, and it was I mentioned to him, I said I'd gone to Carnegie Mellon, and his first thing out of his mouth was, he said, "You don't know that evil Herbert Simon, do you?" They had had a fight in print for 40 years earlier, 1958 or something, and he was still pissed off about it. He didn't want to. If I had kind of owned up to being Simon's student or something, he would have just disowned me. So I said, I don't really do much with Simon. So
he must have had some interesting conversations with economists about supply and demand curves, where the dependent variables on the x-axis.
Well, that's true, how it's inverted. I don't know. But his main complaint was that there was a lot of, there are, of course, in finance, there are a bunch of heavy-tailed processes that economists typically neglect. Okay. Sometimes I go to my office and grab, there's 2 books in there. There's the Scaling book by Jeff West, and there's the Zipf book on my desk. Let me just go grab this. Just as a quick footnote, I want to say that why do we call these things Zipfian in the first place? Well, I do have the first. I own the first book, and I'm going to show you. What Zipf was a linguist of all things. He was not a city theorist or anything else. Here's the kind of data that he had. He had how many words in some text are used once? How many words are used 11 times? How many words, et cetera, et cetera. So he had this plot. He had these data, okay, and so you can just pass around the Zipf book, which actually has the raw data. And this is a reprint from the MIT Press version. But I think it's interesting to notice here that we think about the big thing. The most important things are the New York Cities and the big firms, et cetera. Notice that here, so the words that are used very frequently, he just puts them all into one giant bin and doesn't even care about them. Right? These are the words that are. These are the us and thus of the world. They use, like he says. So the words that are used up to 4,000 times. You can't read it really. 4,000 times. He doesn't even deal with those. He lumps them into something here. what he does is he makes a plot of this. So that's the book going around. And here's the plot. Now, it's just the plot is deeply confused here in the sense that it has a number of occurrences here, a number of words here. No, it's not about ranking or anything. So it's a little bit weird. Actually, let me read one thing here. So he's got this thing done, right? And he doesn't understand it. But most importantly, all these most popular words are not even on the graph because they're just lumped out. So look at this is how often is it used? So this is you can't even see it 10, 20, 30. Like if it's used more than 40 times, he doesn't even consider it on his plot. But those are all the ones that are the most used, right? So the quote here is great. I'm going to show you next. He says the standard curve of English. Talking about this plate. I mean, he knows there's a pattern here, right? You can see the pattern, and but he's not sure what it means. And so, he's trying to probably some physicists. So he eventually calls things like words have a wavelength. He says, which is kind of funny to think about. But I'm not going to be able to find it right now. But what he basically says is, in here he says, I was not that happy about this plot because I can't see all the data. I'm dumping up the data. He's just kind of groping for what to do. And now I don't see it, but maybe someone can look through it and see it. So what he basically does, he says a friend of mine suggested to me that I rank them. That he invokes a ranking. And so he goes from this plate to this plate, where now this is the most common word. Now you finally get that it's actually used 4,000 times. So the Zipf, they finally get this plot, which is now it's actually rank frequency of usage. So now it seems this is the modern way we think about Zipf, okay? Not in this weird kind of way of where he's combined a couple different things. But this is the way we think about it. In order to have stair-step quality, and I'm going to explain why in a second. But so this is how often, this is the rank of the word in terms of how often it's used versus how many times it is in fact used. So this is the us and the thes are up here. Now it has this stair-step quality here because up here, right, these are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so the rank is quite small. And then down here, it recovers the stair-step quality because now you have it's only used once or twice or 3 times. So look, in the middle it's very smooth, but out here it has this stair-like quality. That is slope almost exactly -1. And that was the base in linguistics. This has been a modern mystery for ever since Zipf first stumbled on it. Now, having said that, Zipf was not the first one to discover this. But what I thought I would do is just I'm going to take a small. This is all by the way digression from cities, but just to go through it quickly is that that book was published in 1936. In 1941, he has this very weird book I'm going to talk about in one slide: national unity and disunity. Because once you start believing that the whole world should have slope -1, once you start believing that, you're willing to make some metaphysical predictions, which I'm going to show you what they are. And then this is now the book that is the most well-known, where he kind of summarizes it, 49. Well, if you can find this in a used bookstore, buy it, because it goes on sale. If you can find an original, like on the used book, like on Abe's book or something, it's like $500 or $1,000. It's really expensive to find the original edition. But you can find them in. I found one in Baltimore a year or two ago. So interwar pseudoscience. Okay, so here this is just for fun, really. So Zipf's national unity and disunity, 1941. Okay, now he's Professor Zipf from Harvard, right? And he's has some German affinities. He shows that the rank size plots for cities now. He's a philologist. He's a wordsmith. The rank size plots for Germany. He compares them pre and post Anschluss. Okay, this is when Germany takes over Austria and the Sudetenland. And he says, he looks on the Anschluss because the line is straighter when I put in those cities for Austria and the Sudetenland, right? So this is actually in print as this guy's, this is before the U.S. enters into World War II, right? He's making a claim. And this is just, there's a lot of weird stuff going on in intermediate, or in this intertime. I put this up just for the following reason. I recently visited the University of Torino, in which the Pareto has actually been for many years. And so the econ department is called the Pareto Econ Department. Okay, but to that, we all know from various things that we do here about the Gini coefficient. Well, Gini was there too. Gini became a very famous statistician. So some of you may know what I'm going to show next. It's interwar pseudo-social science. This is Gini's 1929 paper, 1927 paper, The Scientific Basis of Fascism.
Whoops.
If you haven't read this thing, you got to read it. Cause now he actually does not use literally the Zipfian kind of rationale, but he uses other kind of things that if you haven't seen it, were worth going. Zipf was not the first person to do this, though. Turns out Auerbach, paper in German, basically the law of population concentration. He shows that if you basically multiply, because remember the inverse law, you multiply the rank by the population, it's a constant. And he does it for all of Germany. Even so advanced, he actually does it then internationally too. The same kind of results. So we call these Zipf plots. They really should be called Auerbach plots, but we don't call them that.
You can't spell it.
Well, yes, and so something I know, the Stigler's law, the law of eponymy, I'm not sure how you pronounce it actually. No scientific law is named after its discoverer. and some of you may know that Stigler has actually called this thing Merton's law. Merton discovered it first. Okay. So Zipf plots. Let's get back to what we all do, PMFs and PDFs. What's the difference? Here are our data. Let's imagine that they're ranked. Okay, the rank from largest to smallest. This is a very simple relation, but it's not obvious until you think about it. They're all ranked. Index I is the rank, right? This is the biggest, second biggest, third biggest, fourth biggest. So now the Zipf plot is just the log of the size, right? On the vertical axis against the log of the rank. That's all a Zipf plot is. So if we call cap fx the cumulative distribution function, then a normalized ranking, normalized ranking is, let's divide by how many things there are to rank, n of them. Well, this goes from 1. It goes from 1 to 0, right? As we change, go through the So then basically log of this is just going to be, basically log of the rank suitably normalized is just the counter cumulative distribution function. Right, so f goes from 0 to 1, this goes from 1 to 0. And this start out with the ranking, we're going to go that way. So, and then, n is just a constant. So basically, if you were to plot the counter cumulative distribution function versus the log of the rank, you can get a straight line. This is what a Zipf plot is, basically. So the Zipf plot is just a different way of doing a CDF. All right, and then from here you can also do the PMF. All right. So here's what we're going to do with that. Here are the data that I'm going to use. I showed you all the data already on cities and firms, but now we have data on cities, on the firms that are in the cities. Okay, so the kind of data that Eduardo and Joe have been playing with for the last little bit is IRS microdata. I've been using actually is census data, which is derivative of that. It's the same origin, but basically I've got data on what is the location of the firms. Okay, and this is the kind of stuff that you're going to see. Basically, I mean, there are 916 or 17, I can't remember, maybe it's coming up. But imagine the data have this kind of flavor. In Albany, Georgia, there are 2,600 firms, 3,000 establishments, meaning some of the firms have multiple locations for business operations. 46,000 people work there, and the annual payroll is $1.6 billion. Okay, yes, ma'am.
So something I've been wondering about,
Yep.
firms don't have to, they aren't necessarily bound by space. Like
That's right.
cities, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at the firm data here,
Yeah.
are we talking about employment within that district?
That's what it's supposed to be.
Albany, okay.
There are of course some messy cases where the traveling salesman is doing it in various places, or the NBA basketball player who's making his money all over.
People do
So
virtual office work.
yeah. So this is Census's best guess. Census tries to control for this. Census wants to get all the economic activity in Albany, Georgia. How well they do that, I think it's not perfect.
Right.
I got a question online from Grace Evans. Says, how does the research consider industrial parks, for example, Santa Clara, California, or Tyson's Corner, Virginia, or does it not apply?
So yeah, so the industrial park will typically be in one of these areas. Tyson's, Virginia, which is the famous Edge City, that is in the Washington, Baltimore metropolitan area. It would be bigger than some of these are so-called microscopic areas. Look at Alma, Michigan has 600. So Allentown, Easton, or of course, what's the biggest one on here? Albany, so those would be metropolitan areas. These other ones are called micropolitan areas. Some of these edge cities, some of these industrial parks alone would be bigger than an entire micropolitan area. But typically, the industrial park, this is going to be based on, if you look at a map, it'll be based on those clusters we saw earlier, where the clusters are they're the individual tessellations of the map where we're seeing there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically, with these data, I'm going to show you what is these are from data from 2015. I'm going to show you what is the current state of the U.S. economy vis-a-vis firms and cities, all right? And so we're going to look at city sizes based on how many people live there, how many employees work there, how many firms there, how many establishments. And I'll get to the difference in a minute. So this is not just a conventional thing. We're going to do a ranked size plot, all right? Just common to what we've done so far. And the first one is just by residence. This is how many people are in the city. Okay? Now, individual dots in individual cities are all run together down here because there's logs. And what you see is this bend here. So notice that even though there are 917 micropolitan areas, we are not getting a good fit to any kind of power law beyond about beyond about the 600th one. So there are 300 metropolitan areas, and there's say another 300. The 300 next biggest micropolitan. That's really the cutoff on American cities. These are these other ones that are, you know. I just looked and saw one of them is Storm Lake, Iowa. Storm Lake, Iowa is about 20,000 people. That's out here in the tail. It really doesn't fit the overall pattern. Okay. So now this is the conventional thing to do: measure cities in terms of how many people are there. Now what I want to do next is measure in terms of how many firms are there. This is actually firms, not employees. It goes in order of how many firms. No, I said that wrong. Sorry. This is employees. How many employees are there in a city of this size? Now the rough number here, by the way, is roughly, because they're kids and older people, about half as many people, about half of the people in a city are employees. That's not a constant.
Yeah.
So it has the same shape. So we measured city size based on employees. We get also a very similar thing. And now it turns out, let's actually measure how many firms are there. So there's no city with more than about a couple 100,000 firms. In fact, most cities have only in the order of 10,000 firms would be a lot. But notice now, it doesn't really matter how you measure a city size as long as you do it consistently, because they're all roughly the same shape. And now it turns out, what's the difference between a firm and an establishment? We talked about it. We already saw some data. Basically, McDonald's has got 25,000 establishments, but it's one firm. Okay, so in typical town is going to be there's going to be a grocery store chain with several operations, say, and that'll be one firm with many locations. These are the data on the establishments. Typically a straight line or pretty close to a straight line. So I'm going to put these all together. I'll mash these all together, and here's what you get. So this is a plot now of how many people are in a city, how many workers are in a city, people with jobs. Blue is how many firms, and green is how many establishments. And this is a straight line of -1. Now, so a straight line is not but the idea is that we have roughly here something that looks like a power law. A power law is roughly slope -1, roughly the Zipf law. Now, it turns out, some of you may have looked at, I think anybody taking 625 next year, Ken Comer tells me in the spring that he's going to have you guys look at there's a very highly cited paper by Newman, Shalizi, and Aaron Crutchfeld. Clausette, right, on basically how to fit power laws to data. And they spend a lot of time in there doing kind of, I'd call it kind of the mix of, is it really a power law or not? Now, these data have lots of curvature in them, lots of departures. I don't really give a darn about how close it is to really being is it an exact power law or not. What I really care about is there's a pattern here, and eventually we're going to invoke a computational or mathematical model to explain the pattern. And basically, can we reproduce the overall pattern? So whether it's literally a power law or not, it seems secondary, as long as it's a gross way to describe the data. Okay. Now, remember, there's no difference between a Zipf plot, these are Zipf plots, and the CDF, and that's the PMF. So it's unsurprising that when we do the PMFs now of these things, we're going to get the same kind of result. Now this is a PMF of how many residents are in a city, where I've truncated a little bit because there are no very small cities here, but this is just residents, number of workers, number of firms, number of establishments all brought together in this thing, where now the black line is the Zipf law again. So I just put a slope line here. So again, residents, employees, establishments, firms. Qualitatively, they're all the same. They all have little different wiggles in them, different shapes. But everybody okay with the fact that these are skew distributions, no matter how you cut it. All right. So now what we've shown so far is that what I've shown with this stuff is that basically, when we in the U.S. for which we have good data, if you also measure city size by, for example, how many firms there are there, you measure by the economic activity, you get the same ideas as we had if we measure it by people, and this just says the same thing. Measure by payrolls, you're going to get another Zipf law here. So the upshot of all this, in many ways to characterize city size, not just by number of residents, but these are all heavy-tailed distributions where in log coordinates. The ballpark way to do all these things, right? This is something like 12 to 8. This is forward is magnitude. That's roughly 4. Roughly slope minus 1. We can be more precise, but in this case we don't think we need to be. Okay, now what I want to look at next is, do we know though, even though we have skewed distributions of firms and cities and people in cities, do we also know that is it the case that it's actually in the most populous cities where there are also the most firms? And this is just to kind of confirm that. But what we're going to do now here is we're going to say, let's make a plot of how many what? How many workers and how many firms there are in a city. Okay, the city is this size. That's 10 million people in that city. It has that many firms, has that many employees. Now the gap between here is the average city size, is the average firm size. You know, are we okay with that? Mm-hmm. Now what I did with the colors here is that it's too kind of gradual here, but basically every time you see every color here corresponds to the same color here. So if in fact there was a big, if there was one city here that had a lot of firms but had very few employees, that you would see over here. Or if you had a city with very few firms but very large number of employees, very big average firm size, you see that color up here. You don't see much mixing in the colors, so that's it. Now those things appear to be parallel in log coordinates, right? What if we estimate the following? Let's say the counts. This is counts of how many employees and how many firms goes like this, which is basically number of residents at some power. Slope looks pretty close to linear, right? Slope should be about 1. This is now, it's very much like the West and Betancourt stuff. Actually, it's much like the stuff that they do in this book. So that's why I wrote this book out. So this book is about analysis of cities and companies from this kind of scaling perspective of how do things scale. There's lots of data in there. Take a look at. And so if we estimate this thing, we get the following interesting result. The slope is not exactly 1. For firms, it's a little bit less than 1. And for employees, a little bit bigger than 1. Basically, so as a city gets bigger, the number of employees is superlinear in the size of the city, but the number of firms is sublinear. In Jeff's book, which is getting very good reviews, and which I like a lot, he asserts that these are approximately 1, that they are 1, basically. So they're close, but not quite. Now, the reason why it matters is, in their paper, they come up with the following important dichotomy. They say, look, when you do that kind of estimation for cities in general, what you see is that there are a whole bunch of variables. Like, how does the amount of R&D scale with city size? How does the GDP scale, et cetera? A whole bunch of variables that have exponents bigger than 1. They're all the social economic variables. Unemployment, employment, et cetera. Wages. Then there are a bunch of infrastructure things. How many gasoline stations are there? How much road service? How many miles of electrical cables does it take to run in the city? Those are all sublinear. So the infrastructure is sublinear. The human stuff is superlinear. Everybody got that? So now you go back and look at this, and what does it tell you? Remember, our result was that basically the firms are like the infrastructure. Right. The firms are the buildings that hold the bodies, but the bodies are superlinear. Yeah. Bodies are the human part. Okay. But there's something else that happens here. Think about this. Let's take all those 900 cities and plot them now in 3 space, and let's plot them in terms of residents in one axis, how many firms there are here, and how many employees there are here. And notice that all American firms live in this one little narrow band of stuff, right? It's not possible to have an American city out here or out here. It has to be. A functional American city has a specific set of things. This is a gross regularity that's present. There's no theory for why. No one knows why. I don't know why it should be the case, or why isn't it spread? Why is it? This is just the way it is.
So because it's a more efficient use of resources?
Well, that'd be a claim. I want to test that in a sense.
So the old concept of a company town doesn't make it into company city.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
How about Detroit and how about at the industry level?
Yeah, right. So it'd be interesting to unpack that in terms of industries.
Yeah.
So we have. We actually we do have the data to do that. But we haven't done it yet. Yes, sir.
But when you're doing manufacturing, you probably want sub-assembly, subcontractors somewhere near you because of the shipping costs. When you're creating software, your subcontractor can be in New Delhi.
Yeah.
These days, there's so many components are built overseas. I guess because all the transport costs have come way down. Also, that's also.
Well, shipping chips is a lot cheaper than shipping steel bars.
Fair enough. Okay, so one important lacuna here. Why is it like this? I don't think anybody knows. So what I want to do next, I'm going to go very fast now because it's been too long already. But say now we can do things like, okay, how do various variables, economic variables and other things depend on city size? We can just start estimating these things. So it turns out payrolls is also superlinear. Unsurprising, it's a human variable. That's not that surprising. So we can actually then say all these, whether we measure a city by number of residents or firms or employees, these things are all very highly correlated. It doesn't really matter how we do it, we're going to get the same answer. But the correlation does not tell us anything about causation. So I'm still at this question of, do people move to cities to get jobs, or do they move to cities for the amenities and then they get a job when they're in the city? We still don't have any leverage on that because these things are all correlated. But there's no sense of causation.
But when enough of them move somewhere, they raise the price of everything
Well,
because they're bidding for it.
That's a whole other thing. I don't have housing costs in here, but we should have that though. Okay, so now what I want to do in this last final section is I'm basically going to say, okay, now we're going to basically start asking about things like, how does that payroll get sliced and diced among firms and among workers, and how does that scale with city size? Okay, so this is basically how many employees there are per firm. That's the average firm size, right? In my good friend Jeff West's book, average firm size doesn't change across cities, it's all the same. All right? So the slope of this thing basically is average firm size, right? It looks pretty linear. 1.8, so that's going up a little bit. That's the way it should happen. So now we can say, let's compute employees per firm. We're just going to take the previous data and divide it by take the vertical axis, divide it by the horizontal axis. So every dot here now is a different city. How many employees are there per firm? Notice there's some cities that have only 5 employees per firm. Now, this is employees per firm as a function of city size. But I've just argued there are many ways to do city size. So how are we going to do it? Well, here I have city size in orange is based on the number of firms in the city. So that's why the number of firms is a relatively small number. Number of employees is a bigger number. Number of residents would be even a bigger number. I tried putting the third plot out here, but I got too busy. Okay, it's the third set of points. So it's an average firm size as a function of city size. It's got a lot of variability. Notice there is a small trend. You can see some orange points out here. This average city size is around 20. Now it's a little bit below 20. You all have heard me say 120 million workers and 6 million firms. But notice it does have a little bit of trend. And so if you say, let's look at this at the smallest cities, the medium-sized ones and the larger ones, how does the average firm size change? And that's the next plot. And you get this. So this is, the blue line is going to be the smallest, roughly third of cities, averages around size 15. The medium-sized cities average around 20, and the biggest size cities have an average of around 21 or 22. Now, it's reasonable. You can't have a giant monster firm in a small city. Right? But this is not well understood, and the implications of it, I think, are not well known. So we'll come back and talk at the end of this time. Payrolls versus city size. Okay, so payrolls, now we're going to basically slice and dice here. This is going to be the private payroll based on city size in terms of the number of firms. Payroll based on number of employees. Okay, what the two sets of data I always refer to are there's 2 different ways to measure city size. That's right. That's all that's going on here. Hope it's not too confusing. But now payroll. Now you can see where I'm going to go with this. Payroll per firm is going to be a measure of how big the firms are. Payroll per employee is going to measure what the wages are. So here now is the average payroll per firm as a function of city size. And what you see is, remember we talked about earlier, as you go to a bigger city, you get paid more. As you go to a bigger firm, you get paid more. Those are typically estimated separately. So basically people will say, there's this big weight premium associated with being in a bigger city. Well, but you're also in a bigger firm in a bigger city. The accountant who moved from Des Moines to New York is also in a bigger firm in New York than he was in Des Moines, right?
Right.
So this is a way to unpack that. And you get then that average payroll per firm is also, notice there's quite a big difference. The average, in a small city, the average payroll is $500,000. In a big city, the average payroll is well over $1 million. So that's a large effect. And then wages. Wages are going to be just payroll per worker. You also can see a kind of an uptrend here. So in a small city, the average pay for the whole country is something 50,000 plus. But in a small city, it's closer, it's below 40,000, because in a big city, it's going to be higher. This is a big blip up there too. Okay, so you see where we're going with all this. I'll finish the next two slides. I've been talking a long time already. So you guys, many of you know the model that I created many years ago that many people around here have been using various work. So basically, we start out with 120 million agents. We try to get them to arrange themselves into configuration that looks like it's empirically credible. Some firms die. There's no space in any of this. But you remember that what this produces is, produces skew firm sizes, produces an age distribution, growth rates, job tenure, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to skip all that. The main question we're going to ask next was, what would we have to do to this model to make it work in space? It is, we want to now get a Zipf distribution of city sizes coming out while preserving this distribution of firm sizes. So this was the idea that came up with in discussion with Keith, with a lot of people. So remember, there are 917 these metropolitan areas, micropolitan areas. So here's 30 by 30 gives us 900 locations. Imagine this is the blacker it is, the more people are here. So this is mostly uninhabited space, but there's a bunch of little cities here. So the basic idea is, let me go back and say, basic idea with this model is workers change jobs. When you change jobs, you go to a firm that's going to make you better off. So agents are always going to be moving around between firms, but we don't know where the firms are located. Now, it might be possible to do things like put in, that there's going to be a moving cost to move somewhere. We can do that. We can put in things that different cities, different productivity. But to keep the model as simple as possible, this was one idea. Imagine that there's going to be, so let's actually leave all the worker stuff just as it was. But now say, in this model also, firms can start up. So for example, Joe's unhappy where he is, sends out his resume, all those places don't look good to him. I'm going to do a startup, he says. Maciek was here this morning. Let me talk to Maciek, I think. Maciek and Mohammed, as you know, have a startup with Armando. So you do a startup. Where do you locate your startup? Well, theirs was in Alexandria for a while, but now it's they're in Switzerland somewhere.
Zurich, yeah.
Zurich, they're in Zurich now. So here's the basic idea. Imagine that imagine there's a worker in this small city here, and he says, I'm going to do a startup. Should I stay in this city, or should I move to a bigger city? Okay, he picks the bigger city with probability P. Okay? And then there's another worker in this big city who says, I'm going to start up a new firm. Should I stay here, or should I go to the smaller city? Probability Q. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you some class of results, although somewhat preliminary, that I think they're pretty that work for the following configuration: P bigger than Q.
Yeah.
So if in fact somebody who wants to start up a firm is more likely to migrate this way than he or she is that way, then you're going to get the kind of results I'm going to show you now. But let me say the following. As I say this, I'm going to tell you that after I set this thing running in my basement on a big machine about a week ago, and when I went down there to look at it today, hoping to get good results off it, I noticed that everybody was working in one city. They were working in one giant city. Okay, so we had one super Soviet city. So I'm not sure that these things are always going to be the case. But here's what kind of something that happens in a wide wide class of results would be that, or some set of results. So I got 900 cities here. And I can get the people roughly in some kind of Zipfian-like law. Now I've satisfied Mandelbrot. I got more than a half, but I only got about 2.5 decades. So I'm not super on a ton of data here, but I got 2.5. So that's what the American cities are. So it's something that's coming out roughly right. Now this is how many people are in those cities. Remember, it doesn't matter whether you do it by people or by firms. So I am getting when I can get this to happen, I can also get this to happen. That the firms are coming out right. And then you say, well, how many firms are there per city? And the empirical stuff was that it should be about slope 0.96. And we're getting that it's more linear than that. It's almost exactly 1. So anyways, the preliminary results are that we seem to get this. But now, are we getting things like higher pay in the bigger cities? That kind of stuff. We simply have not done enough analysis to know that. Trying to avoid this thing from. I would say that the trouble so far has been that it will occasionally absorb to one large city configuration. So all we have right now is our computational results. I think it's fair to say Keith has been putting in a lot richer behavior into his model. This model is obviously very minimal. Keith's been putting in things like there are moving costs and there are other things going on. So I'm sure that those kinds of realistic things will also add realism. What I was trying to around here was trying to find a simple thing. Now, is it the case that can we answer the basic question? Because the final thing is the basic question was. Do skew firms cause skew cities, or do skew cities cause skew firms? And I think so far in this work, what it seems to suggest is that we get the skew firms independent of the cities, and then it's where the firms locate that causes the cities to be. So this seems to give a definite answer, which I think conforms with the intuition that many of us have had. But it remains to be seen by experimenting. So I'll stop here and take some questions. Thank you for staying with me for over an hour here. Bill.
So your hypothesis that P is greater than Q you had as data. You have support for that.
Yeah, so I think on migrations.
No, not migration. Okay. An accountant here makes this much. Where is he going to move to? He's going to move to a larger firm in a larger city because he gets paid more. He's not going to voluntarily move to a lower income.
So the way it works now is that imagine the guy's here, and if he actually looks around at the firms that are here, and he sees he can make more money here, he'll just do that.
So there's some distribution in each city.
Yeah, but the happy result in our basic case model is we don't actually have some probability, and we just basically have it being that. As people do normal job searches, they find the firms that are growing, and they leave the firms that are dying.
They move to
okay. So that's endogenous, as it were.
Right.
But so it's really this is about these arrows are for the startups. Right. These are how do the startups work.
What about distance? Having some probability dependent on distance.
Yeah. So of course, in real geography, there are these gravity models, so-called. I mean, I'd be very happy if we can get some kind of gravity thing to emerge. I'm going to try to avoid building it in. Okay. But of course, it matters.
When I think about geography, I'm not a geographer, the critical aspect of space is distance.
Right.
So you have some kind of closeness measurement or some accountability for how close relational.
You're of course right, but the thing that's kind of I wonder about is that remember we're back to this thing right we had at the start here that you're going to get these skew structures whether or no matter how you cut it up.
But that might be the interesting test. Does that matter?
Right. Absolutely.
Can you reproduce this kind of result?
Yep. Yes.
So I have two things. The first is related to the first comment, which was talking about going towards higher pay.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a cost of living adjustment.
Yeah.
You have to be making a net increase even though you move to a smaller area.
Right.
It's kind of a common strategy to go to a big city then leave so that you within your firms, you can keep your high salary.
Right, exactly.
And you can get more.
Yeah, right.
So you might need to do an adjustment for how much it would cost.
And so then we have to start putting in things like housing costs, etc. So we don't have good standardized data on that. Now there is a Cauchy-Schiller index. It turns out, but within every city, of course, there's a great heterogeneity of some of the costs. This is a footnote. Some of you have heard me say this before, but maybe you've seen it yourself. So in last spring or last fall. Our good friends at MITRE put a job ad in the engineering magazine, the Tau Beta Pi magazine. It said, "Come work at MITRE in Northern Virginia. Yes, the housing costs are high, but traffic is also bad."
The second comment I had was how do universities and education and training play into
right? Yes.
all of this.
Exactly.
To some extent, that can explain institutions that are going to force the location of people that graduate with degrees, and places that have higher number of people with degrees have more firms start.
That's right. So there's a whole large literature on things like with these technology spin-offs and clusters and industries. And so it turns out one of the most important workers in this area is Marianne Feldman in North Carolina, I believe. And so I was in graduate school with her at Carnegie Mellon, and so that's certainly important. One of the things that happens when you look at these data, look at the kind of the gross data at this very large scale. These are very coarse patterns, obviously, right? And so it turns out that even things like when you do, for example, the firm stuff, things like mergers and acquisitions, which is roughly 2 or 3% of the entire capital structure gets turned over if you're just doing M&A activity. It doesn't even appear in here. So in Herb Simon discovered that back in the 60s. Right? And so there's lots of things that have, right? There's lots of spatial correlation and stuff here. It's surprising that it doesn't really matter much, So I think it's an open question, right? How much, always with these kinds of models, is how much detail do you have to put in versus in order to get out what you want. And I always typically say it on the reverse way. I typically say we've got a lot of empirical realism. We can reproduce many of the empirical things that we see in the data. So if you're going to tell me I need to put more in than into the model specification, you have to tell me what more I'm going to explain with it too. And so now maybe that's just having the model not run away to one giant Soviet city. That'd be progress. But, yes.
Social network.
Say it again.
Social networks. Are
Yeah.
you going to include that in there? And a work acquaintance moved to this city, so probably move to that city.
So as of right now, we only have it in kind of in a backhanded way in that you do have a social network that helps you find a job. So that inadvertently, or that kind of, as a side effect, that does have, then there are between cities. But we don't, but we're trying to build in as least amount as possible. So we try not to put in a second social network, but maybe we'd have to or something. Yes.
You probably want to take a much closer and deeper look at coercion.
In what sense?
Well, a couple of senses. The reason that the Soviet didn't have one really big Soviet city is you want to live in Moscow, you need a job, and you need a permit. A place in Moscow.
Internal passports.
You can't just move there on your own volition. There were some very large enterprises in Eastern Europe in the early 1940s in very small places. They were called labor camps. You can get a lot of people working for one entity in a very small city if you don't care what amenities they think they require, and you can coerce them to go there.
Also, and maybe one question one thought your question brings up is our world is in a monotonically increasing urbanization trend, right?
Yes.
And it's not exactly obvious where that will end. And so could it be the case that if agriculture becomes continues to increase in productivity, can there come a day when you have 11 people in the whole world who are growing all the crops, and everybody else is in one giant city? So I think that the question of either endogenous coercion or basically just market force coercion is causing more and more agglomeration. And is congestion a natural stop for that? It's not obvious. Housing prices. What are the natural things that are constraining that? I think that's.
You could end up with a form of biological coercion as well, because epidemics spread faster in cities.
True.
If we start getting epidemics we can't control with antibiotics, the desire of people to take a little pay cut and be in a smaller community may increase dramatically.
Fair enough. Fair enough. One of those. Yeah, that's true.
So there might be a natural constraint on the one city model if you consider, because I know I've tried to sell you this once already, so let me see if I can try again. So if you consider the jobs as tasks that have a complexity and a nature, so a collection of tasks must be done.
Yep.
That's what a job is, a task, and they have to be done in a specific sequence. So what you have is a network of tasks. So agent that lives in a small city will not move to whatever the dominant city in that region is, because the nature of the tasks that are available in that city do not fit his preferences.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's kind of like cities would average have a division of labor, so there's some company town aspect to it, right? There's manufacturing in Detroit versus services in New York or something. Right?
So I mean, that would place a natural constraint on.
Yeah. As you know, we actually tried to keep skills out of this model for a long time, just because it makes things easier. We don't have good data on skills, but maybe we'll have to put some of that stuff on.
Yeah.
Yes.
A quick question about the model.
Yeah.
What's the time representation in the model?
So in the base model, which you can go and read the base stuff on that, but basically that model is that every month people decide how hard to work in their firm. The firm makes production, and then that production is sold, and then they're compensated. And then periodically, people can move between firms in their firm when they evaluate how hard to work. And so that basic model, without not much more than that, is capable of reproducing many of the empirical facts we have about the population of U.S. firms. But we don't have anything about space in that model. There's nothing about geography in that model. But yeah, on my web papers, which describe the overall model. So let me stop here. Thank you for your attention. There is a paper associated with this that Omar and I have as chapter 7 or something in our book. So if you want a copy of the paper, just holler at me. And the slides are a little bit fat here, but as long as George Mason email take 30 megabyte files.
That's about the limit.
About the
I
limit.
don't
So
know.
these are at least the main files. But if you want the slide deck, just holler at me. We'll get it to you one way or another.
Yep.